Hello, welcome to the Iron Armsman, where we explore and demonstrate the crafts, techniques, and skills related to medieval European martial arts. I'm Connor, and in today's video, I'll be demonstrating how to build a chainmail skirt similar to the one that I'm wearing here. A couple years ago, I decided I wanted to learn how to fight in medieval plate armor, but before I went and spent a bunch of money on armor made by a professional, I wanted to make sure that my underlayers were taken care of first. However, when I went to the web, I found there weren't a lot of resources available on how to make chainmail from scratch and to my specific dimensions. So for your benefit and for the benefit of those that are like me and want to learn more about the skill of crafting chainmail, or just a little bit more about medieval material culture in general to incorporate into your role-playing, fantasy, or writing, this video is for you. I'll be showing how to create a chainmail skirt to another person's dimensions from the very beginning of measurement all the way through the completion of the project itself. See you in the next section. In this first section, we're going to take Haley's measurements. Today I have a tape measure that has both centimeters and inches, but for today I'll be using inches because I'm American and in America we use English, because that makes sense. I'm going to start off by taking her waist measurement. This will determine the narrowmost point at the top of the skirt that'll determine and help the skirt stay cinched above her hips. Which brings me to my next measurement, which is her hips. What this measurement will help us do is it'll help us determine how rapidly I need to expand the chainmail from her waist down to her hips so that she can put it on. Next, I'm going to take the height between the previous two measurements, the waist and the hips. What this will do is this will determine how many rows I have to achieve that expansion and how rapidly I need to expand each row in order to achieve it. Next, Haley, if you could assume a combat stance. I'm going to get the width of the bottom of the skirt. The reason I had her stand like this is that when we're training and she's in a fighting stance, I want this chainmail to be as taut as it can be at the bottom here, so that when weapon shots come between your legs, the chainmail will catch those weapon shots and do its job the way it should. Next, I'm going to get the total height of the skirt from her waist down to the bottom, which will determine the total number of rows I have to make the skirt. With that, we can get into making the chainmail itself. See you in the next section.
So now that we have Haley's measurements, we can talk about designing how the skirt's going to look. So I'm going to start off by creating a very generic drawing of that, starting with the top. This is going to be the waist portion of the skirt. Now, because of her dimensions and the shape of her body, very narrow waist, wider hips, we're going to have to very rapidly expand how quickly and how wide the skirt gets early on. And then it's going to taper off a little bit more so that expansion is not quite so severe. The reason that we're doing this is, again, because of bodily proportions, as well as trying to save on material at the bottom, as well as keeping it taut when she assumes a combat stance during training. The tighter it is, the more likely it is to catch weapon shots going between the leg, so it can properly do its job. Upon Haley's request, she's also asked for me to add circular dags like so. Typically, I would do triangular dags. It's more historical, it's more material saving, and the structure of a triangle is such that it's much better against weapon shots and stuff like that, and it nicely fills the gaps between tacets. But because she doesn't have tacets, we're going to go with this for style points. So thinking about this as though this were the back, we're going to add a slit here, and this is where the chain skirt is going to get tied together so that it can fit over her hips. And then at the top, we're going to have our leather trim, like so, which is going to go all the way around on both sides of the chainmail. And then to either side of the slit, we're going to have a piece of 8-ounce leather, like so, which is going to have sequential holes punched in it in order to tie a lace between, like a boot or a shoe. So now that we kind of have the generic idea of how it's going to be shaped, we're going to talk about how we're actually going to start the chainmail for this. So the way to think of this is that this is going to be constructed of a series of strips that get gradually longer as we go. And we're going to use expansions in order to make sure that there's a seamless transition between each of those increasingly long strips. So first one's going to be like so. Now, because of the size of 9mm chainmail made with 18 gauge wire, if expressed as rows like so, where you've got one row going this direction, one going this direction, they're interlocked. You can think of the distance between a pair of rings like so as being approximately 1 inch, maybe a little bit less. And because of her measurement that we got for a waist, which is around 28 inches, we're going to want about, if you do the math, two rings to an inch, 28 inches, maybe a little bit less, we're going to want about 60 rings in this strip right here. And then it's going to increase from there. Again, because of her physique, we're going to rapidly increase the length of these early on. And then as we get less, they're going to taper off a little bit more so they're not expanding so quickly. In order to achieve the desired length on the skirt, we're also going to use a certain number of rings in the vertical dimension, in this case about 27. So because I'm constructing this of strips of 3 rings each, we're going to need a total of 9 strips, gradually increasing in length each time. And we're going to have to, as we do this, I'm also going to want to make sure that when I end with the number of rings, that it's divisible by 12, because she's got 12 dags on her gambeson, and therefore I'm going to add 12 of these circular dags to the bottom of the skirt so that they kind of overlap and co-witness nicely, so that you can kind of present that cool scalped edge on that skirt. So that's the design. Moving on to constructing the chainmail itself. To start off, I'll cover the tools that we're going to use to create our chainmail skirt. The first of which is going to be a tape measure. This one has both centimeters and inches, very essential to getting our proper measurements to make sure our tailored chainmail skirt is fitting properly. The second is going to be a pair of riveting pliers. This particular pair is from Iron Armsman. It's a company based out of Germany that exclusively makes and produces chainmail as well as distributes these riveting pliers. They're very good. You can tell because of the ratio between the axle, the jaws, where we're going to be crimping our rivets, and how long the handles are. It lets you put a lot of leverage on your rings to make riveting and crimping those rings very easy. Next is going to be a pair of needle nose pliers. I like to have a pair of these in addition to my riveting pliers so that I can use them to twist and break rings if I make mistakes, or just to hold rings in place while I'm using the riveting pliers if I need to for whatever reason. Next is going to be a X-Acto knife. I use this to cut my thread as well as cut any pieces of leather that I need to make our project. Next is going to be what I call a sequential hole punch. This is going to create sequential holes that are going to line up nicely with our rings for when we use our thread to harness stitch our leather components to the chainmail itself. Next is going to be a wide mouth hole punch. This one as well as this one both utilize a mallet to manually punch holes through leather. This particular one we're going to use to create holes for our lacing to go through for the lace that we use to tie the chainmail. And then when I'm using these 3 tools, I also like to have a work surface like so. This is a piece of, I believe, 3/4 inch particle board. You can see the holes where I previously punched through leather material during previous projects. It's just helpful for protecting yourself as well as your work surface, my desk in this case. Next is going to be some thread for when we do our harness stitch to attach our leather to our chainmail. This particular thread, I believe, is 0.3mm, maybe 0.2mm waxed cotton thread. Next is going to be our harness needles that we're going to use to do that stitching. A square or any type of straight edge. I like using a square because I find that having right angles readily available without having to necessarily measure them is really handy. Helps me skip a few steps. And then the straight edge, of course, to cut leather components to square. And lastly is going to be our leather. So the first piece is a piece of 3 ounce. This is just an example scrap piece, not long enough for the project we're going to be doing today. I like 3 ounce leather because it's sturdy enough that it won't deform terribly. It's a little bit of elasticity to it, which isn't a bad thing, but more importantly, it's still flexible enough that when we're creating our leather trim, by folding it over our chainmail, as we will be over the top as demonstrated, it folds nicely, and then because it lays like this, It allows you to use your sequential hole punch to punch neat holes that are concentric with each other through both sides of the material, which will be very essential later on. And a piece of 8-ounce leather, which we're going to be utilizing with our wide mouth punch to punch a series of holes for the lacing to secure the chainmail skirt in the back. That's it for tools. On to starting working on our chainmail. To start off making our strips, I've got a pile of prepared rings. When I say prepared, I've already done the work of making sure that the rings are broken apart. Oftentimes when they come out of the factory, some forge scale gets between the two overlapping parts of the link and prevents these mouth parts from separating. So I've gone ahead and broken that, as well as made sure that the hole in the ring, which you can see right there, is not too close to the inner or outer edge of the ring to make sure that when I crimp my rivet, it doesn't break the ring, to make sure it's nice and strong. And I've got my riveting pliers, as well as our drawing from earlier. So as per our drawing, I'll be making 9 strips of 3 rows each. And when I say 3 rows, I mean 3 going in one direction as a row, and then 2 inner rows going in the other direction. And I'll leave the 3rd row of those inner rows off for the time being for when I do my expansions to connect these strips together. To start off, because I know that the very edge of the strip is going to have a total of 5 rings interconnected, accounting for those 3 outer rows, as I'm calling them, and 2 inner rows, I'm going to connect 5 links together. I'm going to lay those out, making sure that these are in the orientation that I want. This is important because when we make our strips, we're going to want to make sure that they're all in the same orientation, meaning the links will be laying the same way. In this case, I kind of have the upper edge of these outer rows on the right side, just to make sure that when I go to connect them together, those rings are in the same orientation and I don't run into issues. And then I'm going to make the next column of those inner rows. And here I'm starting from the top and then going down. That's just because of the orientation of the mouth on these rings and which way they overlap. Just makes it easier to connect this way when the rings are laying like so. And then when I go the other direction, making the next column for the outer row, I will start from the bottom. As a quick aside, I am using 9mm stainless steel rings here. There's a lot of debate about what material is ideal. That's both based on just practicality as well as historical references. 6, 7, and 9mm are all relatively common. When in a 4-in-1 pattern, 9mm actually does have a lot of gaps. If pierced by a rondel dagger or sword, there's actually quite a potential for there to be still quite a bit of penetration. Mostly did this just because I'm not actually worried about getting stabbed by my training partners, and it saves a lot of weight and time in construction trying to make all that mail. Let's make sure. Oh, I see what happened here. Got a ring flipped around. Okay. This is why the terry cloth towel is really handy. Kind of keeps the project sticking to it so it doesn't flop around too much. Right now it's pretty light, so it kind of wants to flop around. Once you get a little bit more weight to the strip, it'll do a really good job holding itself in place. Another quick aside is there's a couple philosophies for when to do the rivets for your rings. The first of which would be to rivet every ring as you go. And then there's my philosophy, which is to wait until the entire strip is completed and then go ahead and use your rivets and your riveting pliers to go through after you've confirmed that the number of rings in each row in your strip are correct. These come pre-made from the factory as well, these rivets. You can see there, they've got a little mushroom domed part at the top. Makes it very easy to just poke that rivet right through that riveting hole and then use your pliers to set that rivet, which in itself is a little bit time consuming. So another reason I like to wait until I'm done with the strip to do my riveting is just so I don't have to transition between materials, because when you multiply this process by the 5,000 or so rings it's going to take to make this project, you can waste a lot of time just picking up and setting tools down and reaching for different materials. So as you can see, we've got a bit of a cube of material here already made for that first strip, And after another 50 to 60 hours of this, we will be ready to move on to the next step. See you in that section. Holy crap. So after about 60 hours, I've got 9 strips of chainmail. Each one is 3 rows each, with 2 rows interconnecting the other 3. I've left the third row of those middle rows off for the time being because that's what we're going to be adding to connect these strips together using our expansions. But as you can see, we started to create the visual that we drew a little bit earlier with the independent strips. This is one of my favorite parts of chainmail making. It's when creating a bunch of independent strips of chainmail really starts to pull together to create a coherent bolt of steel fabric. Very satisfying once you get to hold it and play with your hands. It's a really good feeling. So let's start getting these strips attached together. We're ready to attach the chainmail strips together. Here I've got 2 strips. This one has the row of unriveted rings that we're going to be attaching to the next one already attached. I took the liberty to do that a little bit earlier. But for demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you how we're going to do the expansion on the first row. So as planned, this one has 60 links in each row, and then this one has 70. So we're going to add a total of 10 expansions between these 2 rows. So the way I'm going to do that is going to start by adding the links where I'm going to have those extra expansions at even intervals across the chainmail. In this case, I kind of evenly divided it like so. So it should be approximately 1 link every 6 links. And then we're going to attach links like so between each one of these, such that there is an extra link, the one that I added earlier already, between the 2 links that would naturally be occurring on this strand. Like so. So as you can see, you've got 2 links that are laying normally with an extra one in between. So this link right here is going to have a total of 5 rings inside of it, and then when attached, because this one's only attached to the single ring on the top, this one's only going to be attached to a total of 3. So without further ado, let's do the rest of the rings. That finishes up adding the rings between the 2 rows that we're going to use to attach them together. As you can see, let's find an example. This ring right here is attached to just a single ring and is joined inside of this ring here by these 2 adjacent rings. I've got 10 of these and an extra 10 rings on this top row. So without further ado, let's connect them together. With that, the first 2 strips are attached together. As you can see, due to the fact that we've got fewer rows on the top strip than we do on the bottom strip, it's already starting to assume this crescent shape so that when these 2 ends are enclosed in the back, it'll form generally a cone shape for the skirt, which is exactly what we want. Without further ado, this is going to take a little while, but I will attach the remaining 7 strips together, and then we can move on to the dag component. Now that we've attached all the strips together, the material is a single bolt of steel fabric. It's got that curve in it, as you can see, generated by those expansions between each successive row. You can even see actually here how some of the rings are a different color that I used, and see those strips presenting themselves there. If you look really closely, you can see where those expansions exist, but only if you look closely. So pretty seamless transition between those. Now that this is complete, we're going to move on to the leather components and attaching it in the back so that we can test fit it. Here I've cut 4 pieces of leather, 2 of this 3-ounce leather that's 1 inch in width, and then 2 pieces of this 8-ounce leather, which is 1.5 inches in width. This is what we're going to be using for the components on the back or inside of the skirt, and this is what we're going to be using on the outside and punching holes through in order to lace it up, which is why we've made it 1/2 inch wider than the rest. So to start this, we're going to punch our stitching holes using our sequential punch. The way I like to start this is because this is about 1 inch across and we've got 1 inch of material here. I'm going to start by lining it up with this forward edge here to get our holes started. Taking them out like so, giving it like 2 solid whacks. And that should do it. So now you can see we've got those holes lined up there. And what this is going to help us do is index for the holes that are going to be along the sides here. So doing the same thing as before, making sure that this edge here is lined up with the edge of my leather so that our holes are nice and straight. And so on. And we're just going to keep doing this until we've punched about 45 holes is what I've anticipated I'll need for this project. Yeah, so that you can see right there I'm straying a little bit from parallel, so we're going to want to make sure we do what we can to bring that back in. Perfection on these ones is not going to be critical, as these ones will not be visible, as long as you've got enough material on the edge here that it's strong, doesn't break, which it will not. Now that we've got those 2 rows, I'm going to finish this off by punching the last 2 holes here. Since I've got a row of 45, I'm pretty confident that this is how long it needs to be. There you go. And then this is where our square comes in handy. Take our square like so, just beyond the edge of those holes, and we're going to cut the material. And that's our first piece. So now that we have this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to work on its mate. So this will be the component that's on the front side through which our lace is attached. And just to make sure that these holes are lined up, I'm just going to go ahead and line it up like so. And using my sequential punch, I'm going to go through the holes and create just a bit of an impression, not enough to go through the material. If I hit too hard, it's going to deform the lighter weight leather, and we don't want to do that. We just want to get enough so that there's a mark, so we kind of know where we're going with our second piece. With our holes punched, we're going to now take the square, just as before, line it up, and cut off that extra material. There we go. And because this component is going to be on the outside and you'll be able to see it, we're going to just do a little bit to make it a little bit prettier. So just going to cut these corners at a 45-degree angle, and then just kind of trimming those sharp edges like so, giving it a bit of a rounded edge. Be a little more severe about these corners since we're not worried about the stitching holes there. Alrighty, and we'll go ahead and do this with the other side. With all 4 of our leather pieces finished, we can now start attaching the lacing leather, as I'll call it, to the chainmail. So to do this, we're going to take our leather as well as a piece of wax thread, like so, which is about 3 feet. I find is a pretty good length to work with, and then we'll use as many as we need of these to get it finished. We're going to put a needle on either end, finishing it with a overhand knot, like so, just so the needle doesn't slip off. Sticking that through the eye and giving ourselves a nice overhand knot. That way it doesn't come off while we're doing this. So taking our material, if we're thinking about this as being the inside of the skirt, we're going to be using this backing leather to do that. So making sure we get our rings aligned like so, and we've got that we're working on the right row. I'm going to line up my lacing leather here. Now we're going to start with the forward edge here, just because it'll be the easiest to keep track of how many rings it is that we're actually going through, so we can get this lined up properly, as that will matter. It's going to line up those 2 holes and then these 2 holes here. I'm going to start by taking one needle and passing it through that ring and into the corresponding hole on my lacing leather piece, making sure that there's about the same amount of distance between our 2 pieces of string so that we can make the best use of the entire thing as we go. So we're going to be doing what's called a harness stitch. So what this means is we're going to be passing these needles through the same hole in the material in order to make sure there's a complete stitch going through each hole on both sides of the material as we go. So what we're going to do is, just as before, we're going to take this needle that's passing over the top here, and we're going to pass it through, making sure it goes to that same ring that the other one was going through. Every ring is going to have 2 threads going through it like this, and passing that through. And now that this is lifted, and that hole is nicely lined up there because of that first thread that we passed through, we're going to take this needle on the bottom side, making sure to pass it through that ring, and up and through the same hole that we just pushed that first needle through. Like so. It's going to be a little tight because we've got those overhand knots on there. And then I'm going to pull this one tight. That'll make sure that the chainmail is nice and tight to that. And then now that I've got this one pulled out and above here, I'm already holding it, let's go ahead and pass this one through the next ring in the series, which is going to be this ring here. Now that we're on the bottom, I'll take my other needle and pass it up through that same ring, making sure not to pierce through that other string. This is very important when you are passing it through these holes. You want to make sure that you're favoring the needle on one side or the other, so you're not puncturing it through the string, because that'll create a bit of a knot that'll prevent us from actually tightening this all the way down, so that the harness stitch can kind of use the natural elasticity of the leather to keep the string in place. Now for this particular pattern, because of how I want the chainmail to expand, I'm going to be putting 2 strings through every single link like so. But then as I'm about to demonstrate, see, as I manipulate material, that string starts to loosen, so we're just going to give it a nice tug just to tighten these up. So because of the expansion vertically that I want in the chainmail and how much I want to restrict it from expanding too far this way, I've decided to add or skip a ring basically every 5th hole. So here, I'm not going to be going through a ring, I'm just going to be passing it through here. And then we'll start our same usual pattern on the next ring, going through those links as before. And we're just going to keep doing this until both sides of the leather are attached to this chainmail. Now that I'm almost done with this row, I'm going to go ahead and turn this corner and stitch this component here. I'm not worried so much about how many rings this is going through, as I already kind of set the expansion of the rings by doing that initial row and counting by rings. Going through here, going back through like so. Okay, and with that we're ready to do our back stitch. So this is how we're going to secure our harness stitch. Doing the exact same thing as before, instead of going forward, we're going to go back through the holes that we've already did. And we're going to do this about 3 times is probably adequate. So what this does is that because the way our knots come undone is tension being put on the leather like so, that pulls the knots apart. By back stitching, the only way that these knots can come apart is if the material spreads, which it won't because of the stitches that are underneath the back stitch. So to finish them, we're going to go forward 1 stitch. I'm going to loop underneath this stitch that's here, rather than going through the hole. And I'm going to create a loop in front of that where I just went through here, and then pass back through. And then I'm going to take out my needle, and then I'm just going to work this material out so that that stitch is lying nice and flat. And then I'm going to pull it forward and back like so. We're just going to make that nice and tight. And that overhand with the wax thread will be sufficient to keep this secure. And then for this one, just so that we don't have any ugly knots on the front side of our project, I'm going to go through to the back side on this one. And do the exact same thing, just 1 stitch above. loop going through, grabbing our tail, pulling out the extra material, and then pulling it forward and back. And that'll make a nice tight stitch. There you go. Now we're going to finish the backside here. Again, less concerned about how many rings as long as I'm going through these top rings up here. And then we'll get them fit together on either side and tested. I've completed the stitching on the trim piece of leather that's at the top of our chainmail. As you can see, I finished it by using a cross stitch going across to our heavier weight leather here in order to make sure that these two stay nice and flush with each other along this line, as well as flush with each other along the top, and adds a little bit of rigidity and stiffness to the mail. So with that, we're going to transition now back to doing some more mail and adding our dags along the bottom edge of the chainmail here. The main part of the skirt assembled completely, we're going to start working on the dags. So the way I'm going to think about the dags is that the bottommost strip of the skirt has 132 rings in it. We're going to have a total of 12 dags lining the bottom, which means that each dag is going to have dimensions of, along the bottom edge at least, of 11 rings. So if we have a circular dag, this is going to be 11. Now, because of the way a circle works, if we look at this as a half circle, that means that this ring, this dimension here, needs to be about 5 rings, which is exactly what I've done here. So I've got a column here of 5 total rings, not including the bottom 2, which are going to be connecting it to the skirt itself. And then from there, we're going to be decreasing the number of rows in this direction, or sorry, columns in this direction, in order to draw in that mail to make it like this. And so very much like the way we did our skirt here, we're going to do the same thing, but in the other direction. So we're going to have strips that become increasingly short, and then when connected and pulled together will form a circle. So I've started working on the first part of our dag, starting with the middle column of rings that's going to form the center of our half circle for our dag. So if we refer back to the drawing we made before, this is going to be that middle strip here. So I've already added 3 rings on the middle row, and then these on what I'm going to call the outside rows, these 2. So we're going to be adding another row going in this direction, which is when we're going to start doing our contractions to start forming that circle by pulling that mail in. The way we're going to do this is that for the first few rows, if I'm thinking about this as being the bottom of our semicircle, I'm going to attach these rings like so, starting just with the first 2 or 3 rings. It's going to be 3. Just attaching these like normal. Now this is where our vertical contractions are going to come in. So now that I've got 3 of these rings that I'm going to be attaching to remaining, I'm going to be attaching it to this ring, to the second ring just as we did before, and then I'm going to be taking this third ring and bringing it over and passing it to this ring as well. So now if we stretch that out a little bit, you can see that I've got 3 rings, 1, 2, 3, all inside of this one ring. Now I'm going to complete this row, or column if you will, by adding this one final ring here. And what this is going to do is this is going to keep the more ugly contraction ring from being visibly apparent by keeping this nice clean 2-in-1 pattern along the outside edge. For this next row, we're not going to add a contraction, we're just going to add our rings as normal. should be 5 rings. Or maybe 4. And now that we have that row complete, we're going to go back the other direction. Starting off with this bottom ring, adding 2 more, or 1 more. And now that I've got my 3 inner rings here exposed, this is where I'll add our second contraction on this side of the semicircle. And there you go. 1, 2, 3. All inside that one ring. Finish off with our outer ring. This will also give us a very consistent pattern to attach a strip of brass rings to, as that is a decorative element that I will be adding to this as well. There you go. As you can see, this row is already starting to turn a little bit, and we're starting to pull this material in. So we're just going to keep doing this until we've reduced it down to a single row on either side, and then once I've got 12 of them, we will attach them to the mail. Our first dag is finished, so I'm going to go ahead and attach it to our skirt. Now, because I'm going to do this without closing the back first, I'm going to offset this 5 rings to account for the dag that'll be kind of straddling that gap once our skirt is done. So count 5 rings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that will be the first ring that we attach our dag to. And that's our first dag attached. These look like they're going to work out really nicely. So we'll just do that 11 more times and connect the skirt together in the back, and then trim our strings here on our leather components, make sure it all fits, and we'll be good to go.
Here you can see the final result side by side with my first project. The most obvious feature, of course, is the triangular versus circular dags, followed closely by the mechanism by which I secure the chainmail skirt in the back. I use a single buckle system versus Haley's lace system. I find her system to be much better, as it puts the tension across the chainmail a lot better. Take it away, Haley. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more content relating to historical European martial arts, and more specifically chainmail, I refer you to my blog below, and please like and subscribe to see all future content.